The world around him spun, the darkness creeping in faster than he could process. The last thing Caleb saw before everything went black was the flicker of the laptop screen. The truth was never yours to control. And just like that, Caleb was gone. The weeks that followed were a blur of hiding, healing, and reckoning. Caleb never returned to his apartment, never turned his phone back on, and never trusted a familiar face without testing every word they spoke. The compound went dark within 48 hours of his escape, blacked out by a silent operation that neither the media nor law enforcement ever acknowledged. No news coverage. No official investigation. It was like the entire facility and everyone in it had been wiped off the map. But Caleb knew it hadn't vanished. It had simply folded inward, disappearing behind the layers of shadow it was born in. Kravitz never resurfaced, though Caleb suspected that kind of mind didn't die. It simply relocated, adapted, and waited for the next phase to begin. The video of the girl, her voice trembling as she repeated words she didn't understand, haunted him the most. It wasn't just a record of abuse. It was a mirror, a blueprint of what they'd done to him and others like him. Not to hurt them, but to mold them, one synapse at a time. He eventually found April, living under a different name in a sleepy town that didn't ask questions. She didn't run when she saw him. She didn't beg or deny. She just stood there, eyes sunken with guilt that didn't need to be spoken aloud. She admitted the truth, that she had been assigned to him, not to love him, but to monitor his compliance, report emotional triggers, and guide his reactions through subtle manipulations. But somewhere along the line, she had stopped sending reports. She said she had started seeing him not as a subject, but as a person. That's why they erased her too. She didn't remember the moment she broke protocol, only that after a particular session, her memories were scrambled and she was relocated with a new name and a hollow echo in her chest she couldn't explain. They had both been pawns, caught in a game neither fully understood, and both bearing the scars of decisions they hadn't truly made. Caleb didn't forgive her. Not completely, but he didn't condemn her either. They were fragments now, like broken glass from the same shattered window, each reflecting a different sliver of the same unbearable truth. He gave her a choice to come with him, to help him document everything they knew, to find the others, those still lost in the system, unaware their lives were fabrications built on erased pain and constructed loyalty. She hesitated, then nodded, not for him, but for the girl on the video, and for all the names on the file Marcus had died to protect. Together, they began compiling the evidence, slowly, carefully, storing it on encrypted servers across different countries, shielding it with layers of anonymity and dead man switches. Caleb knew they couldn't release it all at once. That kind of truth, dropped suddenly, would be devoured by conspiracy forums, buried in misinformation, or dismissed as a digital hoax. They needed to be smarter, slower, more surgical. They started small, leaks to whistleblower forums, discreet uploads to dark web archives, redacted pieces shared with ethical journalists still willing to risk their careers for truth. Each drop sparked questions. Each file unearthed panic behind the scenes. The machine was still alive, but now it was bleeding. Late one night, Caleb sat alone in a diner in the middle of Utah, watching the snow fall through the window while a cheap radio hummed old blues in the background. He scribbled notes on a napkin, ideas for how to expose the next layer of the project, when a kid no older than 12 walked in alone, face pale, and eyes flickering with the kind of confusion Caleb recognized instantly. The boy sat at the counter, said nothing, ordered nothing, just stared at the neon sign blinking outside like it held answers no one else could see. Caleb watched him for a moment, then quietly reached into his coat pocket and slid a worn photograph across the counter. A picture of the facility's interior, the surgical chair still bolted to the floor. The boy looked down at it, then up at Caleb, and finally whispered, "I've seen this before, but in my dreams." Caleb nodded slowly, and for the first time in weeks, he felt something more than fear. Not hope exactly, but purpose. This wasn't over. It might never be over. But for every erased memory, for every manipulated soul, for every truth buried beneath the surface, there would now be someone watching. Someone listening. someone fighting back. And just as he was about to leave, the old payphone outside the diner began to ring, a sound that hadn't echoed through the quiet night in years. Caleb froze, pulse spiking, then slowly walked toward it, snow crunching under his boots. He picked up the receiver and said nothing. A voice on the other end whispered, "We know what you did." He didn't speak, didn't breathe. Then the voice added, almost gently, "But do you remember why?" And just like that, the question hit him harder than any truth he'd uncovered. Because maybe he hadn't been the victim all along. Maybe once he'd helped build the system too. The line went dead. You ever witness something that just stops you cold? Like the kind of moment that makes the whole room go quiet, but not because anything's been said, just because of the weight of what's about to happen? That's exactly what went down inside a quiet diner on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in upstate New York. Picture this. A little girl sitting with her mom, smiling through a mouthful of shiny new braces, just trying to enjoy her pancakes. She's glowing, genuinely glowing, because she's finally brave enough to show her teeth in public. It's a huge day for her. But just a few booths away, someone's laughter slices through the room like a knife. Not warm laughter, not friendly. No, this was cold, cruel, direct. A full-grown woman pointing and snickering like she was back in middle school. She even nudged her friend across the booth and whispered something behind her hand. What she didn't know, though, what none of them knew, was that someone else was watching. Quietly, calmly, strategically. Someone who wasn't about to let that moment go unanswered. And that someone just happened to be one of the top-rated pediatric orthodontists in the state, sitting just one table over. Before we dive in any deeper, I need you to lock in with me for a second, because what you're about to see isn't just about braces or bullies or even about revenge. This story is about something a whole lot bigger. It's about dignity, confidence, the quiet power that comes from being kind when it's easier to ignore. And yes, by the time this story ends, you're going to find out exactly how this man, this dentist, flipped the entire situation on its head using nothing but facts, experience, and a masterclass in humility. So, if you click this video expecting some sweet justice or a feel-good moment that'll stick with you for the rest of the day, don't even think about clicking away. Because you're in the right place. And trust me, it's going to be worth it. Now, if you've ever had braces, you already know they're more than just metal and wires. They're a journey. And for kids, especially girls in middle school or high school, braces can feel like the end of the world. Every awkward smile, every school photo, every lunchtime where you worry about something being stuck in your teeth, it's all part of the experience. You don't forget it. Especially not when someone laughs at you for it. And that's what makes this moment so personal. Because even if you never had braces, you've been that kid in some way. The one who just wanted to feel okay about yourself, but someone else decided you weren't good enough. Maybe it was your clothes, your skin, your weight, your stutter. Maybe it was just your silence. But you remember what it felt like. That flush of embarrassment. That sting behind your eyes. That voice inside that says, "Why me?" That's why this video isn't just a story, it's a mirror. And I want you to see yourself in it. I want you to think about the last time you saw something wrong and didn't know whether to speak up. Or maybe you did speak up, but it backfired. We've all had moments where we wish we could go back and say the right thing, do the right thing. But what if someone did? What if someone saw it happen right in the moment, and instead of looking away or laughing along, they took a stand that changed everything? That's the twist. Because the man sitting at that next table, he didn't yell. He didn't make a scene. He waited. He listened. And when the time was right, he did something that left the entire diner frozen in silence. Even the waitress paused. The people who had laughed, their smirks disappeared like fog in sunlight. The girl with braces? She went from shrinking behind her napkin to sitting tall, eyes wide. Her mom, too, stunned into silence. And that moment, that shift, is the reason you need to see this through to the very end. Because the way this dentist handled it wasn't just professional, it was legendary. Now, let's talk atmosphere for a second. This isn't a fancy place. It's not some five-star brunch spot where everyone pretends to be polite. This is your classic American diner. Vinyl booths, laminated menus, The kind of place where locals grab coffee refills for hours and waitresses call you Han without blinking. It's the kind of place where everyone knows someone, where small-town energy mixes with big-hearted stories. And maybe that's why what happened here matters so much. Because it reminds us that you don't need a camera crew or a viral hashtag to do the right thing. Sometimes all it takes is the courage to say something and the timing to say it when it'll matter most. Let me introduce you to the girl at the center of this. Her name's Emily. She's 13. This was her first week back at school after getting braces, and she had finally convinced her mom to take her out for breakfast to celebrate a good math grade. Emily's smart, sweet, and painfully shy. She barely talked above a whisper at school and always sat in the back of class. Her braces? A big deal. A chance to fix the thing she always got teased about. Her teeth weren't crooked from neglect. They were crooked from genetics, plain and simple. But kids don't ask questions. They just point and laugh. And Emily had spent years covering her mouth with her hand, skipping school photo day, avoiding mirrors. So today, when she smiled at her mom and didn't cover her mouth, it meant everything. And then came the laugh. The woman 2 booths away, mid-30s, dressed like she'd just left a yoga class, locked eyes with her friend, and tilted her head toward Emily. They didn't even try to hide it. You know the type. Loud laugh. Loud opinions. Everything is a performance. She muttered something just loud enough for Emily to hear. Something that made her expression crumble in real time. Her fork froze midair. Her mom's smile vanished. But neither of them said a word. Because what could they say? That's when the man at the next table cleared his throat, slowly set down his coffee, and turned to look at the women behind him. Now, this man didn't look like much at first. Late 40s. Quiet. Clean-cut. Polo shirt. Reading a newspaper, for God's sake. But behind those glasses was a storm brewing. Because what those women didn't know is that he's spent the last 20 years helping kids like Emily. Fixing smiles. Building confidence. Watching what bullying does from a front row seat. And he was not about to sit in silence while it happened 2 feet away. But here's the genius of it. He didn't call them out right away. Oh no. He waited. And what he did next? You'll have to see to believe. Because the way this man flipped the script, right there in the middle of a diner, did more than silence a bully. It taught everyone within earshot a lesson they'd never forget. And trust me, you're going to want to hear exactly what he said. Because it wasn't just words. It was a masterclass in how to take a public insult and turn it into a moment of truth. And here's the kicker, it wasn't just Emily and her mom who walked away changed that day. But before we get to that, before we unpack the words that shifted the air in that room like a thunderclap, let me ask you something. Have you ever had a moment where someone stood up for you when you least expected it? Because for Emily, this was that moment. And what came next? Well, that's where things really got interesting. Stick around, because the next 5 minutes will make you rethink what standing up really looks like. As the rain continued tapping lightly against the diner's windows, the world outside seemed distant, muted by the fog and dim light, but inside, something far more electrifying was taking shape. The man with the newspaper had shifted just slightly in his seat, but that small motion sent a ripple of energy through the air. It wasn't a grand gesture, not yet, but the kind of subtle change people feel before a storm hits. Emily's mom noticed it too. She glanced in his direction, uncertain whether to be hopeful or afraid that attention was about to make things worse. She didn't recognize him, not at first. But that would change. What she also didn't know was that this wasn't the first time he had witnessed something like this. It wasn't even the first time this week. His name was Dr. Caleb Hartman, and to his patients, he was just Dr. H. Known around town for being calm under pressure, almost unnaturally so, Caleb had a quiet reputation for fixing more than just teeth. In fact, the locals joked that his waiting room was like a second home for kids going through tough phases in life. He listened more than he spoke, gave advice when asked, and never forgot a name or a face, even years later. What most people didn't know, though, was that Caleb hadn't planned to be at the diner that day. He was supposed to be out of town, speaking at a dental convention in Boston. But something had changed at the last minute. A canceled flight? A quiet emergency? That part hadn't been shared with anyone yet. And that mystery, why he of all people ended up at that booth at that exact moment, was something we'll unravel piece by piece. What's even stranger is that earlier that morning, Caleb had received a phone call that left him visibly shaken. His assistant said he went into his office afterward, shut the door, and didn't come out for nearly an hour. When he finally did, he packed up quietly and told her he needed to take care of something personal. No one asked questions because Caleb never showed signs of distress. But today, he looked tired. Not physically, but emotionally. Like someone who had seen something or heard something that stirred up the past. And while he sat there reading the paper, sipping his black coffee, it was almost as if he was waiting for something, though no one knew what. Back at Emily's table, things had shifted again. She had stopped eating. Her eyes, once glowing with confidence, now stared down at her plate, tracing the same spot over and over with her fork. Her mother leaned in, whispering something gentle, maybe trying to remind her that mean people aren't worth the energy. But it wasn't working. That one moment of cruelty had already sunk in, and we all know how fast that poison spreads. It doesn't just hurt, it echoes. And the worst part? The woman who laughed didn't even look sorry. She went right back to her eggs Benedict and latte, chatting like nothing had happened. But every so often, she would glance sideways, sneaking another look at Emily like she was watching a sideshow at a circus. What kind of person does that? And more importantly, why? That's where this story starts to twist. Because the woman, let's call her Mel for now, wasn't just a rude stranger. She wasn't even new to town. In fact, she'd lived there for nearly 2 years, though no one really knew her. She kept to herself most of the time, moved in after a messy divorce, and had a tendency to change jobs every few months. She wasn't on Facebook. Her LinkedIn was bare. And people around town noticed she asked a lot more questions than she answered. Something about her always seemed off. Not dangerous, necessarily, but like she was trying to blend in while hiding something. Which makes what happened at the diner feel less like a random outburst and more like a piece of something bigger. Because here's the thing, Caleb Hartman had seen her before. Not just in passing, not just on the street, he recognized her. And when he turned to look at her after that cruel laugh, there was a flicker of something behind his eyes. Not anger, not confusion, recognition, and maybe even a little regret. That brings us to the part that's hard to explain. Because you might be thinking, why would a dentist know this woman? And why wouldn't he say anything right away? But that's what makes this story so tangled. Because Caleb wasn't just any dentist, and Mel wasn't just any customer. Their paths had crossed before, years ago, under circumstances neither of them expected to be reminded of. And yet here they were, side by side once again. Now, while all of this was unfolding in real time, other people in the diner began to notice. A couple in the corner whispered to each other, eyebrows raised. A teenage boy near the jukebox paused mid-swipe on his phone to observe what was going on. The waitress, who had been refilling coffee, slowed down, instinctively sensing tension in the air. It was like the entire room was holding its breath, waiting to see who would speak first. And then there's the wild card in all of this, the man sitting by the window. He'd been there when Caleb walked in, face half hidden behind a hoodie, sipping tea from a cracked mug he brought himself. No one seemed to know him, but he watched the scene unfolding with quiet intensity. Not like someone eavesdropping, but like someone taking notes. Now, this guy had been seen around town a few times over the past month, always alone, never speaking much, always at the edge of things. Some thought he might be a writer. Others whispered about private investigators. No one had concrete answers, but his presence here, on this day, only deepened the mystery. Because as Mel laughed and Caleb turned, this man didn't just glance up. He leaned forward slightly, as if this was the moment he'd been waiting for.
But why?
What did he know? By now, you're probably wondering if all of this is coincidence or something more orchestrated. And that's the exact question that will keep pulling you deeper into this story. Because when you start connecting the dots, the canceled trip, the unspoken history between Caleb and Mel, the stranger with a hoodie, it starts to feel less like a moment of chance and more like a scene from a bigger plan. but whose plan? And for what purpose? As Caleb finally spoke, his voice calm, controlled, and low enough that only those nearby could hear, something shifted again. Mel stiffened in her seat. Her smile faltered, just for a second. Whatever he said, it struck a nerve. But before anyone could catch the words, he turned back to his paper and took another sip of coffee like nothing had happened. Mel's friend whispered something urgently in her ear. Emily looked up, startled. And for a split second, even a man in the hoodie stopped taking notes. What did Caleb say? Why did Mel react the way she did? And what does all of this have to do with a girl just trying to have breakfast without being mocked? You'll find out, but only if you keep watching. Because the pieces are just starting to move. And the truth? It's messier than you think. Just as the air inside the diner began to settle into a fragile stillness, something unexpected disrupted the uneasy balance. A busboy, no older than 17, rushed over to Caleb's table carrying a tray that rattled with half-filled coffee cups and stained napkins. He leaned in with a quiet urgency, said something under his breath, and Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly. It wasn't panic, but it was close. Without a word, Caleb folded his newspaper, stood up, and followed the boy through the swinging kitchen doors in the back. To anyone watching, it seemed routine, maybe even polite. But for those paying attention, it was clear something serious had just been whispered in his ear. And it wasn't about coffee. Meanwhile, Emily, still reeling from what had happened, excused herself to the restroom. Her mother stayed behind, watching nervously as her daughter disappeared down the narrow hallway, head lowered. It was one of those moments where you know something's coming. You just don't know from where. And as the kitchen door swung closed behind Caleb and the busboy, the man in the hoodie stood up too.
Slowly, casually.
He didn't follow them, at least not directly. Instead, he made his way to the counter, ordered another cup of tea, and positioned himself with a perfect view of both the kitchen entrance and the hallway where Emily had gone. It wasn't just observation now. It was calculated positioning. But what was he waiting for? Back in the kitchen, things took a sharp turn. The busboy led Caleb to a cramped office tucked behind a pantry, pulled out a crumpled paper napkin from his apron, and handed it to him. Scrawled on it in shaky handwriting was a name and a phone number. Caleb stared at it, lips pressed into a thin line. The name wasn't unfamiliar. In fact, it was someone from his past. Someone he hadn't spoken to in over a decade. A former patient and a friend who had once betrayed him in a way that still left scars. Her name was Jessica Fielding, and she hadn't been seen in this town since the night she vanished without warning, leaving behind nothing but speculation and an unpaid dental bill. And yet, there it was, her name, written in all caps, followed by a burner phone number and the words, "Do not trust Mel." The message raised more questions than it answered. Who wrote it? How did it end up in the hands of a teenage busboy? Why now? And more importantly, how did Jessica know Mel if she was even still alive? Caleb felt the weight of old wounds stirring. Jessica had been part of his clinic's outreach program back when they both volunteered to help kids with no insurance. She had a way with troubled teens, understood the pain behind their silence, and for a while, they made a good team. Until one day, she didn't show up. Her house was empty. Her number was disconnected. Whispers about debts, threats, and stolen files started circling quietly among people who knew her best. And now, out of nowhere, she was reaching back through a napkin, warning him about the woman sitting just 20 feet away on the other side of the kitchen wall. As Caleb slipped the note into his pocket and turned to leave, the kitchen manager stepped into his path. His face was tense, his voice low but firm. "You don't want to get involved, Doc," he said. "Not with her. Not again." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a warning. And it hit Caleb harder than he expected. Because the manager, Dave, wasn't just some guy flipping burgers. He had worked security before. Military, some said. Quiet about his past. Always polite. Always watchful. And if he was telling Caleb to back off, it meant something was brewing deeper than personal history. Caleb returned to the dining area with a slower step, head down in thought, as if every table now carried a memory or a secret. Mel was still at her booth, though now noticeably tenser. She kept shifting in her seat, glancing at her phone, tapping it against the table as though she were waiting for a message or dreading one. Her friend had stopped eating entirely and seemed to be asking questions that Mel avoided answering. It was all unraveling. The kind of unraveling you don't notice until it's too late. And then, without warning, Emily screamed. The whole diner went silent. Within seconds, her mother was up and rushing toward the hallway where her daughter had gone. Caleb was right behind her. The man in the hoodie moved too, but he didn't run. He walked, calm and precise, reaching into his jacket for something no one could quite see. When they reached the restroom door, they found Emily standing just outside it, pale and shaken, pointing inside. Caleb entered first. Nothing looked broken. No blood. No sign of a struggle. But the mirror was fogged up, though the faucet hadn't been running. And in the middle of the glass, written with a fingertip, was one word: stop. No one else had entered that hallway since Emily walked down it. No one had left. The waitress swore it. The security cameras in the corner blinked red, but displayed no signal on the monitor behind the counter. Someone had cut the feed. Back in the booth, Mel was gone. Her purse, her phone, everything left behind. And that's when Caleb noticed it. Inside her purse, tucked between her wallet and a crumpled receipt, was a laminated photo. A school picture. A girl with long brown hair, braces, and soft hazel eyes. But it wasn't Emily. It was someone else entirely. And Caleb recognized her. Not from this town. Not even from this state. But from a missing person case that was never solved. So now the questions multiply. Who is Mel, really? What connection does she have to this girl in the photo? And what is she running from? Why did she disappear the moment things got tense? And what was her real reason for laughing at Emily that day? Because that laugh might not have been about cruelty at all. It might have been a warning. Or worse, a message. And this story? It's about to take a darker turn than anyone could have guessed. The photo weighed heavily in Caleb's hands, more than a simple image should. There was something about it. Maybe the way the corners were slightly singed, or how the girl's eyes looked just past the camera, not into it, that made it feel like more than just a school picture. It wasn't Emily, but she looked eerily similar. Too similar. The kind of resemblance that could easily cause someone to mistake one for the other, especially if they hadn't seen the real girl in years. And that's when Caleb remembered the name scrawled on that napkin, Jessica Fielding. Because this girl? She wasn't just part of a cold case. She was the daughter of Jessica's closest friend, a woman who had once worked as an assistant in Caleb's clinic before abruptly quitting. Rumors had swirled back then, something about illegal prescriptions, records going missing, things no one wanted to say out loud. And now, just as Mel vanishes without a trace, this photo surfaces like a ghost dragging the past into the present. But what no one saw coming was what happened 20 miles away at that same moment, in a quiet house tucked near the edge of the old state highway. A retired librarian named Margaret, who once babysat Emily and still kept in touch with the family, was sorting through her attic when she found something strange wedged behind an old trunk. It was a sealed envelope, brittle with age and addressed in the same shaky handwriting as the napkin Caleb received. Inside was a single sheet of yellowed paper and a photograph, the same girl. Same braces. Same haunting eyes. Only this time, she was standing in front of a brick wall marked with graffiti, a jagged tooth with a red X through it. Margaret, unnerved, called Emily's mother immediately. But as the call connected, static swallowed her voice. A low hum, almost mechanical, buzzed through the line before it went dead. Moments later, a text came through from an unknown number. 3 words, all caps. Burn the photo. That's when Margaret noticed something else. Her attic window, which hadn't opened in years, was cracked an inch wide. And someone had left muddy footprints beneath it, leading to a long-forgotten trapdoor that she hadn't used in decades. She locked every door in the house and called the sheriff, but he was already overwhelmed, because similar calls had started coming in from across the county. People finding strange photos in mailboxes. Scraps of burned dental records under windshield wipers. And in one case, a Polaroid taped to a child's bedroom window. All of them showed the same girl, and none of them were dated. Back at the diner, Caleb knew something wasn't right. He stepped outside, needing air, needing space to think, but the moment he turned the corner, a woman was waiting for him. Dressed in dark jeans and a sweatshirt, her face partially hidden beneath a baseball cap, she handed him a flash drive and walked away without a word. Caleb called out, tried to stop her, but she slipped into a waiting black SUV parked beneath the flickering streetlight and was gone before he could get a plate number. The flash drive was unlabeled, scratched, and looked like it had been pulled from the bottom of a toolbox, but once he plugged it into his laptop back home, the screen came to life with grainy footage, surveillance video from the diner, but not from today. It was dated 6 months earlier. Same diner, same booth. And sitting in that booth was Mel. But she wasn't alone. Sitting across from her was the same girl from the photo, only she looked older, sharper, more aware. She kept glancing over her shoulder as if she expected someone to burst through the door. And then something strange happened. Mel slid a folder across the table to her, and the girl opened it, her expression shifting from confusion to fear in a heartbeat. She said something, there was no audio, but whatever it was made Mel reach across the table, grab her wrist, and lean in close. The girl nodded reluctantly, then stood up and walked away, leaving the folder behind. Mel waited until she was gone, tucked the folder under her arm, and smiled at the camera. It wasn't the kind of smile that says everything is okay. It was the kind that tells you things are only just beginning. And if that wasn't enough to unravel the threads of certainty, Caleb received a voicemail just an hour later. It was from a number he didn't recognize, but the voice? It stopped him cold. It was Jessica Fielding. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. Her message was a breathless whisper, recorded in motion, with wind rushing past and sirens in the background. Caleb, you need to stop. They know about the diner. They know about the girl. You were never supposed to find the photo. And if Mel's gone, it's because she's trying to protect something bigger than you realize. Don't trust the mother. Don't trust the boy. And whatever you do, don't go back to the clinic. They're watching. Then the line cut out. And that was it. Suddenly, everyone was suspect. Emily's mother, who had appeared shaken but not surprised. The busboy, who somehow had a napkin from a woman missing for years. The man in the hoodie, who now seemed less like a stranger and more like a planted observer. Even the kitchen manager, Dave, whose warning now sounded less like concern and more like complicity. Caleb felt the walls closing in. Every clue led to more confusion. Every memory of Jessica brought up darker ones he had buried. The girl in the photo wasn't just someone missing. She was the key to everything that had gone wrong, and maybe everything that still could. But before Caleb could make sense of any of it, his phone buzzed again. A new message. No name, no number, just a photo. It was a snapshot of Caleb's clinic, taken from across the street at night. A single light glowed in one of the upper windows, even though no one was supposed to be inside. Beneath the photo was one word: tonight. And suddenly, the mystery wasn't just about Mel. It was about what she left behind, and who would do anything to keep it buried. Caleb couldn't sleep that night, not with the weight of everything pressing on his chest like a cinder block. He sat by the window, watching his own clinic across the street. Every so often, a car would pass slowly, its headlights cutting across the building's facade like a spotlight in a crime scene. The upstairs light stayed on. No movement. No shadows. Just that eerie, persistent glow from the same room where they stored old patient files. Files that hadn't been touched in years, some from cases long closed or forgotten. But now, every inch of that room felt like it was whispering secrets he was never meant to know. At 2:43 a.m., a different sound pulled him from his thoughts, tires crunching softly against the gravel behind his house. Not his driveway, not the street, his backyard. He moved slowly, heart pounding, and peered through the back window. A tall figure stood at the edge of the tree line. They weren't moving. They weren't even trying to hide. They just stood there, arms at their sides, facing the house. Caleb blinked, rubbed his eyes, looked again, gone. Not a single trace. No sound of retreat, no footsteps. But something was left behind. At the base of the tree, a white envelope, glowing faintly in the moonlight. He waited until dawn before daring to step outside. When he finally opened the envelope, his breath caught. Inside was a patient chart. Not digital, paper, old, yellowed. The name at the top, Emily Harris. But it wasn't just her dental records. It was something else. A typed report from a psychiatric facility that Caleb had never referred anyone to. Dated 4 years earlier, marked confidential, it described a young girl admitted under an alias after suffering from intense delusions involving voices from the mirror and missing days. But the photo attached to the report wasn't Emily. It was the same braces girl. Again. And then the front door slammed shut behind him. Caleb ran back in, thinking it was the wind, but everything felt wrong. His laptop was still open. The flash drive was gone. He tore through the house, panic rising with every breath. How could someone get in so quietly, so cleanly? He called the police, but by the time they arrived, there was no evidence of a break-in. No prints. No boot marks. Just an open door and a missing flash drive that, of course, couldn't be proven to exist. They left with a shrug, telling him maybe he'd misplaced it, that maybe he was stressed and needed rest. But Caleb knew better. Someone had been inside. Someone had watched him. And now they had the only copy of what he'd seen in that footage. That evening, things got worse. Mel's mom, Deborah, didn't answer her phone all day. Caleb had tried calling a dozen times, texting her repeatedly, even driving to her house, but she wasn't there.
Her porch light was on.
Her car was in the driveway. Her mail, untouched. The curtains had been drawn tight, which was unlike her. She was the kind of woman who always had the windows open, the music playing, something baking in the oven.
But now, silence.
And when Caleb knocked again, something moved inside. He was sure of it. A shadow near the back room. He called out her name, tried the door locked. He walked around back, tapped on the windows. Nothing. When he returned the next morning with a welfare check request, the house was empty. Spotless. Not a dish in the sink, not a pillow out of place. Except for one thing. In the middle of the kitchen table, a used dental retainer sat on top of a page torn from a phone book, with the words, "Not her mother," written in red ink. That broke him. It wasn't just a threat anymore.
It was a game.
And whoever was playing had access, knowledge, and an unnerving ability to control the pace of everything. Caleb started noticing things that made his skin crawl. His front door not latching quite right, his coffee mug moved to the wrong side of the table, headlights idling down the block just a few seconds too long. It was in the small things. The surveillance. The psychological pressure. He started writing everything down. Every face he didn't recognize. Every car he hadn't seen before. Every sound outside his window that didn't belong. But paranoia quickly became something worse, doubt. Because when he went to check on Dave, the cook at the diner who'd warned him earlier, he wasn't there either. According to the other staff, Dave hadn't shown up for his shift. No call. No message. Just vanished. And when Caleb asked the manager if he could review the diner's own camera footage, he was told the system had been offline for 2 weeks due to software issues. Too many missing people. Too many disappearing files. Too many coincidences. The edges of reality were starting to fray, and Caleb felt like he was falling into something deeper than just a missing girl. This was structured, organized,
timed,
and it had roots. That night, a letter was slipped under his door. No return address. Handwritten in shaky pen. It read, "You're not looking for a girl. You're digging up a burial site. Stop before you end up in it." Caleb sat at his kitchen table for hours, staring at the letter, rereading every word until they felt burned into his brain. He thought about quitting, about letting it go, about pretending none of this ever happened. But the truth was clawing its way to the surface, and even if he tried to walk away, it would follow him. It already was. He picked up the retainer again, the one from Deborah's table, and noticed something he hadn't before. On the inside, almost invisible to the naked eye, were 2 numbers etched in tiny print, 06-21. A date? A code? A room number?
He didn't know yet.
But it was just enough to keep him chasing the next thread. And what he found next would blow everything open. Caleb had no intention of returning to the clinic that night, not after everything that had unfolded. But the numbers etched into the retainer, 06-21, wouldn't leave his mind. He kept seeing them, hearing them whispered in the back of his thoughts like a ticking clock. There was no appointment with that number, no file code, no reference in the system. But then he remembered the old basement, sealed off after the flood 2 summers ago. Most of the staff didn't even know it existed, and it had been used years ago to store old records before everything went digital. A dead zone. No cameras. No sensors. No noise. Caleb knew he had to go, and as much as every instinct in his body told him to stay away, he was already halfway across the street before he realized his keys were shaking in his hand. The stairs creaked like old bones beneath his feet. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of mildew and something else, metallic, stale. He reached the bottom and aimed his flashlight across the room, dust swirling like fog through the beam. And that's when he saw it, a locked metal filing cabinet that hadn't been opened in years. It had a label scratched off and replaced with handwritten numbers, 06-21. His heart thudded as he picked the lock with a tension bar he used during emergencies, and when it clicked open, he was met not with files, but a small black box. Inside was a mini DV tape, an old surveillance format. The label read, "Patient recording, Harris, E." He didn't have the tools to play it right there, so he locked it in his briefcase and drove home, speeding through lights, eyes flicking to his rearview mirror every few seconds. Once home, he dug through his closet until he found his dad's old camcorder from college. He jammed the tape inside, praying it still worked, and hit play. The screen lit up with static, then settled on an image that made his breath stop cold. It was the brace's girl, Emily, or at least the girl he thought was Emily, sitting across from someone just off camera. She looked terrified, eyes flicking nervously to the side every few seconds. And then a voice, low, methodical, unnervingly calm, began asking her questions. But they weren't dental evaluations. They were psychological interrogations. Questions about memory gaps, hallucinations, disassociations. Her answers were desperate, inconsistent, like someone who couldn't trust their own thoughts. But the worst part was the final minute. The camera zoomed out just enough to catch a sliver of the person interviewing her, and Caleb dropped the camcorder. It was him. The video was time-stamped from nearly 5 years ago. He didn't remember this. Didn't recall ever meeting her before the diner. Didn't remember the session, the room, the questions, none of it. But the video didn't lie. He'd been there. He'd conducted the interview. And worse, his voice was firm, cold, clinical, completely unlike the Caleb he knew himself to be. He was wearing a different badge with a logo he didn't recognize. In the corner of the screen, the words Archive Research Initiative flickered for just a moment before the tape cut to black. His hands trembled. Was it doctored? Was it a deep fake? Was someone trying to manipulate him into thinking he was part of this? But every instinct told him otherwise. This wasn't new tech. This was old.
Analog.
Physical. It had dust on it that couldn't be faked. That's when the nausea kicked in. What else had he forgotten? He staggered to the sink, splashing cold water on his face, his reflection blurring. And that's when another memory surfaced, one he had buried so deeply that it hit him like a freight train. Years ago, he'd taken a sabbatical from the clinic. 3 months. He told everyone he was going on a meditation retreat upstate. He even posted staged pictures. But now, those months were a void in his mind. No clear memory, just fragments, a sterile hallway, bright lights, the hum of electricity, voices speaking in acronyms. And always the number 06-21 echoing somewhere in the distance. He grabbed his phone, dialing Dave's number in a frenzy, only to realize he had no number saved under Dave's name. No last name. No contact. No trace. The cook who'd warned him. Had he ever really existed? But before he could go deeper, another sound jolted him upright, his front door creaking open, slowly, deliberately. He froze. Every light in the house dimmed at once. Then the TV turned on by itself, flickering with static, before displaying one single sentence in bold red letters. You were never supposed to remember. Behind him, the camcorder ejected the tape on its own. The truth was worse than he imagined. He hadn't stumbled into a mystery. He'd been part of it all along. Caleb stood in the dark silence of his living room, heart pounding so loudly it muffled everything else. The TV screen still glowed red with that chilling message, "You were never supposed to remember." And even though the house had returned to its usual hum, something in the air felt irrevocably changed. He didn't sleep that night. He didn't even sit. He paced in slow, deliberate circles until the sun cut through the blinds like pale knives, and even then, he didn't feel relief. All he felt was the growing dread that the people closest to him, those he had trusted without question, had never really been who they claimed to be. By morning, he made the call he'd been avoiding for hours. His older sister, April, picked up on the second ring. She'd always been the rational one, the emotionally grounded sibling who could talk him down from the edge of anything. But when he began to tell her about the camcorder, the tape, the erased contact info, the number 06-21 repeating like a cursed riddle, her tone shifted. She grew quiet, not confused or concerned, but cautious. She started asking strange questions. Have you been sleeping enough? Are you sure you didn't dream it? Are you still taking your meds? That last one made him freeze. Caleb had never taken any medications. He'd never needed them. But the way she said it, with casual certainty, made something click in his chest like a misfired gear. Either she was lying or she knew more than she was letting on. He drove to her house without warning, his mind spinning with images of conversations, childhood memories, everything they'd shared, now under a lens of suspicion. When he arrived, she wasn't surprised to see him. In fact, she greeted him like she'd been expecting this. "Let's not do this here," she whispered, guiding him to the back patio where the walls couldn't listen. Her voice was hushed, but firm, and what she said next unraveled the fragile thread of his reality. "You were part of a clinical study, Caleb. Years ago. You volunteered after Dad's accident. You wanted to forget the trauma, so you signed away your memory of it. That's why your timeline has gaps. That's why you don't remember. You asked for this." Caleb sat in stunned silence, his mind racing with possibilities, each one darker than the last. If what she said was true, then his entire perception of himself, his motivations, his ethics, his choices, was built on a lie. But even more terrifying was the implication that his life had been manipulated without his knowledge. "Why now?" he demanded. "Why is everything unraveling now?" April hesitated before answering, her eyes darting toward the tree behind the house. "Because someone breached the archive. Someone pulled your original file. That tape? You weren't supposed to find it. And whoever leaked it, they want you to wake up. But if you keep digging, if you don't stop now, you'll endanger both of us." That was when she handed him a sealed envelope. Inside was a plane ticket, one way, to a remote cabin in British Columbia, and a note that simply read, "Go off-grid. Now." The implication was clear. He had two options: disappear and live safely with the mystery unsolved, or stay and risk exposing a truth that could destroy him, and maybe others too. April's face betrayed no emotion, but her hand lingered too long on the envelope. She wasn't just worried. She was terrified. As he got back into his car, Caleb felt the full weight of the decision pressing down on him like a vice. Could he really walk away? Could he turn his back on the questions that were tearing at the seams of his identity? And most disturbing of all, was April telling him this to protect him, or to silence him? The memory of her measured tone, the way she guided him outside, the envelope already sealed and ready, it didn't feel improvised. It felt planned. Driving home, he caught sight of a black SUV parked across the street from his building. No plates. Tinted windows. He drove past his own apartment without stopping, heart pounding, adrenaline surging. They were watching him now. The decision wasn't a decision anymore, it was a trap. If he ran, he might buy himself time. But if he stayed, he might finally uncover the truth. And with every mile he drove, He realized the real question wasn't what had happened to him. It was why. Caleb didn't sleep again. Not that sleep would have done anything but feed the panic already churning inside him like a wildfire. The plane ticket burned in his pocket as he sat parked in the middle of nowhere, not ready to go, not ready to turn back. The SUV hadn't followed him this time, but that didn't mean he was alone. His gut told him this went far beyond April, beyond the strange tape and the scrambled memories. Something deeper, institutional, was in motion. It wasn't just about one forgotten moment. It was about people like him, many people like him, being erased and rebuilt without their knowledge. And now that he had started pulling at the threads, the whole thing was unraveling. That night, his phone buzzed, not from April, but from someone he hadn't heard from in over 5 years. Marcus. His old college roommate, the one who dropped off the map after graduation, supposedly working overseas. Caleb had all but forgotten about him. The message was short, cryptic, and unsettling. It wasn't just you. Meet me at the old observatory. Midnight. Don't bring your phone. Caleb almost didn't go. But the weight of silence from April, the SUV, the unanswered questions, they all pushed him there like a tide. The observatory was abandoned, hidden deep in a stretch of state forest long forgotten by the public. When he arrived, Marcus was already waiting, flashlight in hand, looking leaner, harder, and infinitely more paranoid than Caleb remembered. What Marcus revealed over the next hour shifted everything. There was a name, Project Rescript, a government-funded behavioral research initiative, hidden under layers of corporate shell companies and defense contracts. It had started innocently enough. PTSD treatment for combat veterans, trauma survivors, experimental neural reconditioning. But somewhere along the way, the project changed. They began recruiting test subjects without full disclosure. People were being manipulated, not to heal, but to erase. Certain memories were marked as destabilizing and wiped. Others were rewritten entirely. The subjects? Everyday people. People like Caleb. Teachers. EMTs. Nurses. Even journalists. All of them had been unknowingly selected for specific psychological profiles, susceptible to influence, but with high-functioning intelligence that made them useful. And the most terrifying part? They weren't just erasing memories. They were replacing them. Entire belief systems were being manufactured and implanted. Caleb wasn't chosen because he'd asked for it. He was chosen because he'd fit a behavioral model designed by people who believed they could shape the perfect citizen, one thought at a time. Marcus had evidence. Redacted files. Confidential lists. Even a few surveillance images, one of which sent ice down Caleb's spine. It was April, in a lab coat, standing next to a man Caleb didn't recognize, but whose name Marcus whispered like a curse. Dr. Leonard Kravitz. The lead behavioral scientist on Project Rescript. Supposedly dead for the past 3 years. Supposedly buried in Arlington. But very much alive, and apparently still active. Marcus believed April had been involved from the beginning, not as a bystander, but as a handler. She had been the one monitoring his progress, adjusting his emotional inputs, staging the random events that triggered regressions or panic attacks. Everything from the way she called at just the right moment to calm him down, to the way she knew about meds he never remembered taking, it was all part of a profile management protocol. Caleb staggered away from the meeting in a daze, his entire identity now under siege. He couldn't trust April. He couldn't trust anyone. Even his memories, especially his memories, were suspect. But the moment he reached his car, headlights exploded behind him. Another SUV. Not black this time. White. Military-grade tires. No plates. They were done watching. Now they were moving. Marcus shouted for him to run. But before Caleb could even hit the tree line, a flash of light and a deafening crack split the air. Marcus went down. No scream. Just silence. Caleb didn't stop to look. He ran until his legs collapsed under him, until the forest swallowed every sound but his own breath. He buried his phone, swapped his jacket, and vanished into the night. The truth was out. The conspiracy was real. But what haunted him most wasn't the scale of it, or the fact that April had betrayed him. It was the sick realization that he might have done the same to someone else, once upon a time, if they had asked him, before the memory was stripped clean. Now, with no one left to trust and the net closing in, Caleb had only one option left: go dark and expose the truth, or disappear forever like so many before him. And just when he thought things couldn't get any worse, his phone buzzed once more from deep in his coat. No number. No location. Just a message. Your file wasn't deleted. It was copied. And someone else has it. He stared into the shadows, suddenly aware that the real threat wasn't just coming after him, it might already be inside him. The storm outside had been raging for hours. Caleb stood at the edge of the abandoned warehouse, rain lashing against his face as he stared at the silhouette inside. The place was empty, too empty. His heart raced, echoing in his chest as he tried to make sense of the situation. He'd been led here by a single cryptic message: the answers are in the dark. It had been weeks since he first uncovered the truth about the conspiracy, weeks of running, hiding, piecing together fragments of a life that had been stolen from him. He thought he knew who was behind it, who had orchestrated the endless cycle of manipulation, control, and erasure. He thought he understood who he was fighting against. But this was different. There was something about the way it felt, empty but full of meaning. He wasn't alone, and he knew it. With every step he took toward the door, memories from his past, blurry and distant, began to resurface. Faces, voices, moments that didn't quite add up but were too familiar to ignore. The girl in the video, the one whose voice had haunted him, was part of the puzzle he couldn't seem to complete. What if she wasn't just another victim? What if she was a link, a key to unlocking the final truth? As he stepped inside, the door creaked, and the silence swallowed him whole. The shadows in the corners seemed to move on their own, and the sound of his breathing felt deafening. He called out, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Is anyone here?" No answer. But he wasn't surprised. He wasn't supposed to find them so easily. This was a game, and every step he took, every decision he made, was part of their plan. His eyes darted to a table in the center of the room. It was covered with files, documents, and a single laptop that blinked as if waiting for him. Caleb approached cautiously, scanning the room. The walls were bare, no hint of any decoration or sign of life. Just cold concrete and the lingering smell of something foul. The laptop's screen flickered, then came to life. A message flashed on the screen. "You really think you can stop us?" A chill ran down Caleb's spine. He wasn't alone after all. The voice he'd been hearing wasn't just in his head. It was real, and now he knew for certain who it belonged to. He picked up the file on the table, flipping through it with shaking hands. What he saw shattered everything he thought he knew. It was a record of experiments, research papers on the manipulation of memory, the rewriting of identity. But the most shocking revelation was the name at the top of the documents.
His own.
Caleb's name had been there, listed alongside other subjects. He wasn't just a victim of the system. He had been part of it. The man he had spent weeks chasing, the one who had stolen his life and erased his past, was someone he had known, someone he had trusted. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind him. He spun around, heart hammering. There, standing in the doorway, was someone he never expected to see. Dr. Marcus Kravitz. The man who had been orchestrating everything, the one who had shaped Caleb's life into a series of false memories and fake identities. But Kravitz wasn't just the villain Caleb had been hunting. He was family. "You don't understand, Caleb," Kravitz said, his voice calm, almost soothing. "You were never meant to be an outsider. You were meant to be part of something much larger. We gave you purpose, a life you could never have imagined on your own. And now you want to throw it all away? You want to burn it down?" Caleb's mind was racing. This couldn't be happening. His own blood, the one person who should have been protecting him, had been manipulating him all along. The betrayal cut deeper than anything else he had experienced. "How could you?" Caleb asked, his voice cracking, filled with disbelief and pain. Kravitz's lips curled into a smile. "I didn't have a choice. All of this, is bigger than you, bigger than me. It's about control, about rewriting the world to fit the truth we create. You were a soldier, Caleb, not a victim. And you always have been. The words hit like a punch to the gut. Caleb's hands trembled, the pieces of his life now scattered in front of him, none of them fitting together the way he'd thought. His whole life, every decision, every relationship, every moment, had been shaped by a man who had never cared about him. Only about the experiment. You think you can walk away from this? After everything you've done? Caleb's voice was thick with fury, but also fear. Because deep down he knew Kravitz was right. Caleb was more than a victim.
He was part of the plan.
The room felt smaller now. The walls closed in as Kravitz stepped closer, his eyes glinting with something darker than mere malice. There is no walking away, Caleb. You're either with us or you're nothing.
This isn't some game. This is reality.
And you've always been a part of it. In that moment, something inside Caleb snapped. He reached for the files, knowing what he had to do. He wasn't going to let Kravitz win, not this time. But as his hand closed around the last piece of evidence, a sharp pain exploded in his side. He looked down. A needle. His vision blurred as Kravitz's voice echoed in the back of his mind. I'm sorry it had to end this way, but you'll understand soon enough. Just like all the others. The world around him spun, the darkness creeping in faster than he could process. The last thing Caleb saw before everything went black was the flicker of the laptop screen. The truth was never yours to control. And just like that, Caleb was gone. The weeks that followed were a blur of hiding, healing, and reckoning. Caleb never returned to his apartment, never turned his phone back on, and never trusted a familiar face without testing every word they spoke. The compound went dark within 48 hours of his escape, blacked out by a silent operation that neither the media nor law enforcement ever acknowledged. No news coverage. No official investigation. It was like the entire facility and everyone in it had been wiped off the map. But Caleb knew it hadn't vanished. It had simply folded inward, disappearing behind the layers of shadow it was born in. Kravitz never resurfaced, though Caleb suspected that kind of mind didn't die. It simply relocated, adapted, and waited for the next phase to begin. The video of the girl, her voice trembling as she repeated words she didn't understand, haunted him the most. It wasn't just a record of abuse. It was a mirror. A blueprint of what they'd done to him and others like him. Not to hurt them, but to mold them, one synapse at a time. He eventually found April, living under a different name in a sleepy town that didn't ask questions. She didn't run when she saw him. She didn't beg or deny. She just stood there, eyes sunken with guilt that didn't need to be spoken aloud. She admitted the truth, that she had been assigned to him, not to love him, but to monitor his compliance, report emotional triggers, and guide his reactions through subtle manipulations. But somewhere along the line, she had stopped sending reports. She said she had started seeing him not as a subject, but as a person. That's why they erased her too. She didn't remember the moment she broke protocol, only that after a particular session, her memories were scrambled and she was relocated with a new name and a hollow echo in her chest she couldn't explain. They had both been pawns, caught in a game neither fully understood, and both bearing the scars of decisions they hadn't truly made. Caleb didn't forgive her. Not completely, but he didn't condemn her either. They were fragments now, like broken glass from the same shattered window, each reflecting a different sliver of the same unbearable truth. He gave her a choice to come with him, to help him document everything they knew, to find the others, those still lost in the system, unaware their lives were fabrications built on erased pain and constructed loyalty. She hesitated, then nodded, not for him, but for the girl on the video, and for all the names on the file Marcus had died to protect. Together, they began compiling the evidence, slowly, carefully, storing it on encrypted servers across different countries, shielding it with layers of anonymity and dead man switches. Caleb knew they couldn't release it all at once. That kind of truth, dropped suddenly, would be devoured by conspiracy forums, buried in misinformation, or dismissed as a digital hoax. They needed to be smarter, slower, more surgical. They started small, Leaks to whistleblower forums, discreet uploads to dark web archives, redacted pieces shared with ethical journalists still willing to risk their careers for truth. Each drop sparked questions. Each file unearthed panic behind the scenes. The machine was still alive, but now it was bleeding. Late one night, Caleb sat alone in a diner in the middle of Utah, watching the snow fall through the window while a cheap radio hummed old blues in the background. He scribbled notes on a napkin, ideas for how to expose the next layer of the project, when a kid no older than 12 walked in alone, face pale, and eyes flickering with the kind of confusion Caleb recognized instantly. The boy sat at the counter, said nothing, ordered nothing. Just stared at the neon sign blinking outside like it held answers no one else could see. Caleb watched him for a moment, then quietly reached into his coat pocket and slid a worn photograph across the counter. A picture of the facility's interior, the surgical chair still bolted to the floor. The boy looked down at it, then up at Caleb, and finally whispered, "I've seen this before, but in my dreams." Caleb nodded slowly, and for the first time in weeks, he felt something more than fear. Not hope exactly, but purpose. This wasn't over. It might never be over. But for every erased memory, for every manipulated soul, for every truth buried beneath the surface, there would now be someone watching. Someone listening. Someone fighting back. And just as he was about to leave, the old payphone outside the diner began to ring, a sound that hadn't echoed through the quiet night in years. Caleb froze, pulse spiking, then slowly walked toward it, snow crunching under his boots. He picked up the receiver and said nothing. A voice on the other end whispered, "We know what you did." He didn't speak, didn't breathe. Then the voice added, almost gently, "But do you remember why?" And just like that, the question hit him harder than any truth he'd uncovered. Because maybe he hadn't been the victim all along. Maybe once he'd helped build the system too. The line went dead.